Rachel Potter. Part of the housekeeping, we are recording today. So thank you, Veronica, for managing that for us. Veronica is part of our special interest group, and we are sponsoring this today. We're the OER special interest group for ABAI. I'm also here with another colleague, Ryan Sain, who is my co-presenter today. So you will be listening to us, you lucky people, for the next little bit. We're glad to have you here today to listen to us talk about teaching ABA content with OER. So some housekeeping things, just to let you know, we are providing one free continuing ed through Mary Baldwin University. That is my home university and soon to be Ryan's home university as well. We're happy to be sponsoring this for you today. So there'll be a little bit of housekeeping. If you are wanting that continuing ed learning credit, please put in the chat box your first and last name so that we can be sure to get that to you. There'll also be a survey link at the end and a QR code for you to reaffirm that name and give us your credential number so that we can be sure to get that certificate out to you as well. So if you would do that both now and then again at the beginning of the presentation so we can verify that you were here, that would be fantastic. Veronica is kindly monitoring that attendance for us so that we can be sure to do that. And I'm hopeful that Veronica will also help us monitor the chat box and interrupt us if necessary with some good questions in case we're not being as attentive as we ought to the chat box as we go through. So we will go ahead. Let me share my screen and hopefully we'll inspire you with some great ideas. Questions are welcome. There'll be an opportunity at the end, but by all means interrupt. I have the attention span of about a gnat. So I will definitely miss your question if you put it in the chat box, but we will get there. So let me share my presentation here. All right, so this is today, June 26th. This lovely little logo thing here at the bottom, we're going to be talking a little bit more about this and what this means. Ryan's going to get on that a little bit later today in the presentation and talk to you about these funny little letters and pictures of this little guy with a little bi symbol underneath here that looks like directions to a bathroom. So we'll tell you a little bit more about what this means and why this is significant to our presentation today. But long story short, when we send you your certificate, I'm going to send you a copy of this presentation as well. And you'll know what this means and what it means you can do with this presentation. And I don't mean that as a, let me tell you what you can do with this, but let me tell you what you can do with this, because there will be some cool stuff that you can do with this if you are so inclined with this presentation today. So let's get started with telling you all this cool stuff that I hope that we're going to accomplish today. One is tell you what OER are. You may know some aspects of OER. You may have some inclination of what open means, but maybe not the distinguishing features of open educational resources versus open access. We're going to try and lay the land out for you so you understand the difference between the two of those and why they are awesome and important for our discipline, but also a little bit about why we're kind of in a sucky situation right now because maybe we don't have quite as much as we would like to have. But most importantly, what does this have to do with equity, right? So equity is really important to us. Ryan and I both are university instructors, and we are concerned with equity for our students and student access to resources and what that has to do with student performance and student outcomes. So why does this matter? We're going to address that. We're going to talk about that. And hopefully that's important to you. And even if you're not a university faculty member, you might be a supervisor. You may be working with colleagues in a supportive or supervising role where matters of equity in helping others as learners matters to you with preparing the next generation of behavior analysts. So hopefully we will do that for you as well. Going to give you a couple of examples of what faculty, certainly what Ryan and I are doing to use OER and some open pedagogy. And then we want to inspire you. How can you help? So we are the special interest group for open education resources for ABA. So we are going to try and entice you and convince you that you want to be part of this really cool stuff that we're doing. And how can you help be a part of this, whether or not you are in higher ed, why this work is awesome, some cool things coming up, and why you might want to be really excited about being part of this work. So, Ryan, what on earth is an OER?
I don't know. I need to go now. I think we're, I can't really follow that because that was really well done. So really an open educational resource that's kind of the question, right? What are they? So we've done other CEUs on them. You can type it into Google and you can find an answer. So here's what we do. Here's how we kind of approach it, which is pretty standard out there. As part of the OER SIG, we kind of all have the same approach to how these things work, right? So a resource that can be used to help teach topic. It's that simple. You really, really don't need to do it's not something special other than really what's coming up next, right? So it can be anything. You might be aware of some of the videos I've done. You might be aware of some of the Instagram stuff we've done. You might be aware of all sorts of things out there that other people have done and contributed and to the community as a whole. Some of those are open, some of those are not, right? So what makes it open? Well, it's 5 R's. It's really that easy. First off, there's so many R's when we start doing this. There's Rachel, there's Ryan, there's the 5 R's here. There's a lot of it. Anyway, so reuse, retain, revise, remix, and without the comma, because I'm awesome like that, redistribute, because we need an Oxford comma there. I'm going to just like die if there's not one. So reuse, right? So what's reuse? So these are the 5 criteria that you have to meet in order for something to be considered an OER, an open educational resource. So reuse, you have to allow people to reuse the item, whatever it is. All right. Then you also need to allow that person to retain it, meaning they have to have the rights to the item. They can't just like be borrowing the rights from you for a while. It's like when you loan somebody out a tool, you either give them the tool or you loan them the tool. We're giving people the tool here, right? So I don't ever want the wrench back. It's okay, neighbor. I'm never going to bother you for it again. I don't need it and you can have it. But you also get to keep your own copy, which is kind of cool. So revise, okay, so you can modify the thing. If you don't like the way I said it, or Rachel said it, or Veronica said it, or Bob said it, or Jeff said it, or Hashim said it, you just change it and do it again. So you can revise that particular resource, which is pretty useful. Not only that, you can remix it, you can change it up, you can mix it with other stuff, and you can plug, play, modify, do all these other crazy cool things. And then the really cool part, you get to share it. Again, you can share it without any changes. But you probably will want to make changes, otherwise what's the point of resharing it, right? So you redistribute it. But you have the right to redistribute it. So those 5 criteria are really what makes something open, okay?
So
or
Ryan,
open educational resource, sorry. Yes.
Ryan, how do I know if it's open? Like if I find this really cool resource online, like how do I know that it's open?
Well, I do believe we have a slide coming up on that relatively soon-ish. How do you make something open? So let's just go the other direction with it, right? So how is it open? Well, first off, your rule of thumb is unless you know it's not. So if you know that something is open, and we'll talk about how in just a moment, then it is. But if you don't know it, then you have to assume that at the very least, it's got a full copyright associated with it. In reality, if you find it on the internet, it's probably an open access type item. And some of those open access items are open educational resources. So really all you're looking for is that fancy little picture on the very front of our presentation, which was the little CC bathroom thingy. And now we've got this permanently pasted into Maggie's brain. I love it. And it's the little character, the little silhouette, a single silhouette with the words BY, with the word by under it. So really all that means is CC, a Creative Commons type license. And the one type that is literally just by. You just have to give credit. That's it. Say, hey, you got this from Rachel. Hey, you got this from Veronica. And that's it. That's all you got to do. So to identify the open educational resource, you'd look for that particular tag, CC BY, or there's CC open licenses, but BY is the absolute least restrictive one. There's some other things we can get into, but that's beyond the scope of this discussion. So in this particular case, BY is one. There's other things that can be added to those. There's other attributes that can be added to those things, and you have to watch out what those attributes mean because it immediately makes something not open or not an open educational resource in the true sense, because it may be that you can't modify it, or that you can't sell it, or that you can't do redistribute it. They may have different rules on those things. So it has to have all 5 of those criteria. So what aren't these things? All of it. Like everything on this page is not an OER. And I'm not picking on anybody. I just literally typed open or ABA podcasts into Google, and that's what came up. I just started grabbing a few. So it's just alphabetical. So except for Operant Innovations, I found, oh, I had them too. So they're all open access. You don't have to pay to get them, but you can't really doing is you can't modify them, you can't redistribute them, you can't own them, you can't remix them. Why? Because they're not OERs, right? So any publisher materials that your professors get, technically those are open, but not OERs. Most things you find on the internet are not. And kind of the favorite thing in the world is that memes are a classic example of something that's not an OER, but everybody treats them as such. I don't know of anybody that released some of those original photos or drawings that said that these are open, like they didn't tag them with the CC BY, right? So, so memes is like the biggest, like, I don't know what you want to say, copyright violation in history. It's great, I love it. So anyway, there's just tons of stuff, but they're open access. They're not necessarily OER. No, you're good. Oh, Rachel, you're muted.
Nobody wants to listen to me anyway, so that's fine. That's what my students tell me. So I mentioned earlier when we were going over the objectives that this has something to do with diversity and equity, and that matters significantly to us as faculty. So we are concerned about our students having access to materials because it impacts their ability to become good students and have good outcomes when it comes to the content that they're learning, whether it is our ABA courses. Of course, I'm most concerned about that as an ABA professor, but I'm also concerned about my students and their other courses, whether it's English. Okay, I don't care about other courses. I do. I actually legit care about my students and their other courses as well. So what we know that college tuition rates are increasing faster than rates of medical costs and other general consumer costs. So that's crazy. We are seeing that, and it's insane. And what happens is you have, let's look at sort of traditional age students, right? Students who are coming out right out of high school, and what they hear is, okay, well, we can give you student loans, and that sounds, or we can give you financial aid. Financial aid sounds nice, right? It sounds kind. The word aid sounds gift-like and helpful, but financial aid is burdensome. Financial aid is loans, and it just sounds a little bit different in that context. So we know that most college students are also working, right? They're holding down jobs while they are engaging in the work of being a student, which is fine. I did that. Many of you probably did that as well. They are working more hours. The more hours they work, that's having an impact on their performance as students. And certainly there's a disproportionate impact on those who may be from minority groups or from marginalized populations. I know in an earlier presentation that I did with Veronica, we talked about food insecurity, and that we're seeing that with students at the college level as well. And so again, this notion of student loans being terribly burdensome, but when you call it financial aid, it can sound very appealing to students. When you talk with students who may have dropped out or have left the college experience, and you look at reasons why they may have done it, certainly there are lots of different factors. There are lots of reasons why students may leave the college experience before completing, but rising textbook costs and textbook costs in general absolutely are a factor. They might not buy them. It's expensive. And when they're having to pay for textbooks, it might impact how many classes they take, right? A student who might be on the cusp, let's say a full-time undergraduate student, might be deciding, well, am I going to take 4 or 5 classes this semester? Well, part of the dilemma in deciding how many classes to take might be dependent on textbook costs, right? That becomes part of the decision, or specifically hunting for classes based on what texts are going to be required, looking at syllabi, glancing at the textbook sessions, specifically choosing courses that have lower textbook courses. And sometimes these might not be courses that they need, which end up in the long run costing them more, because those might not be courses that they need towards their outcome, towards their degree, towards their major, but it's going to fill their need for their schedule for that semester. I also find, and for those of you who are also university faculty, I don't know how often you've been in this situation, but I certainly try to minimize textbook requirements as much as possible. In our program, we try to overlap texts course to course as much as possible. But the number of times I have a required text And a student will still email me when the semester begins and say, you know, Dr. Potter, do I have to buy this textbook? Or do I have to use this textbook? I won't use the word buy. Do I have to have this textbook for the course? And I'm like, yes, it's in the syllabus. You have to, this textbook is a required text. I know, but do I really need it? Well, there are required readings that you have to use from this textbook in order to be successful in this course. I know, but do I really need the textbook for the course? And it becomes this cyclical conversation. And, you know, I've taken other steps that I can, have books on reserve and that kind of thing. You know, I have some books that I can loan, but these conversations that I have with students, these are not unusual conversations. These are every single semester especially when I have on-campus undergraduate students. Do I really need this textbook? And what happens is sometimes against advisement, they will still not acquire the textbook, not access the textbook, will choose to rely just on my content delivery and not the readings. They will stay in the class and they will do poorer in the class because they're choosing not to do the readings, even if I'm making readings available, say in the library on reserve. Or they'll get into the cyclical situation where in order to be able to, you know, pay for the textbook, you know, Veronica's talked about this in a previous conversation. In order to pay for a textbook, students are working more hours. So they're working more hours to pay for a textbook, but because they're working for more hours, when do they have time to read the textbook, right? It becomes the sort of cyclical issue of access and equity. And so it's really important to me as a faculty member and as a program director that I continuously review the instructional materials that are being used in my department to minimize, I'm not yet at the point where we can eliminate, but to minimize the cost that we're having to put upon students within our program, because we're absolutely seeing that kind of impact for our students. When it comes to the diversity piece, and specifically now I'm going to speak to ABA and the students that are in our discipline. We're fortunate now that the BACB is choosing to share some, though they're not disaggregating quite the way I would like, some demographic data. So we do know who the providers are in terms of race and ethnicity breakdown. So we know essentially who our students are, who are these aspiring BCBAs, who are the aspiring BCABAs, or RBTs that may be coming through our university programs. And, you know, we have a sense of who that breakdown is. And we also have a sense globally from research and from statistics of the fact that some of these minority and marginalized populations are the ones who are being hurt more by textbook costs, by the burden of having to maybe work more hours, by greater student loan burden when they graduate. And so I think if we're conscious of that, it can be particularly important for us to be aware of that. The other thing, and I realize I'm hovering on the slide a long time, but that's because it's really, really important to me. And so Ryan might forgive me for not moving on just yet. But my favorite of those 5 R's that Ryan talked about, since Rachel wasn't one of them, is remix, right? So with OER, the fact that with an OER material, you can do stuff to it. You can edit it. You can change things. You can pull in different examples. You can change images. You can find different examples. You can pull out examples that you don't like, that maybe don't represent your community. The fact that you can remix these materials so that they represent your community, your student population, allows you to make a resource representative of the community that you serve, or of the community that you are preparing students to serve. And that is something really special about an OER that we don't see in our primary texts. So a couple of years ago—
Can I interject there in a moment? Finish your thought, but I want to interject.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, there was an article in Behavior Analysis and Practice where some researchers surveyed faculty who were teaching intro courses in ABA, specifically at the undergraduate level. And I remember filling out the survey that later became this study, where they asked, you know, what books and what articles are you requiring? And they published essentially a list of what the top 10 assigned books were, what the top 10 assigned articles were. And so I went through that list, and, you know, no surprise probably to any of you that were on here, but of the books, the top 10 assigned books, there were 14 authors of those 10 books, because some of them had co-authors. So 14 authors, 9 of which were unique authors, 2 female, 7 male, and 14 of which were all 14 were white authors by my perception, I will say. I didn't ask anybody to self-identify, but I think perception matters. Of the top 10 assigned articles, 32 total authors with duplication, so 24 unique authors, 3 female, 21 male. My perception, again, I think perceptions matter. I didn't ask anybody to self-identify, 23 of which were white. So when you have those resources that are given to you, those traditional textbook materials, or there's pre-published resources that we tend to go to in our discipline as faculty members and instructors, they are not diverse, and they don't represent the diversity of that data, which we are now able to see because the BACB is publishing it. Even though that is not as diverse as it should be, it's certainly more diverse than the resources that are available. But OER allow us to remix, which is why they are fantastic. So we can edit those and make them representative of the population that we're serving. So,
and as an example of that
box, but let's talk about strengths. I will rest my voice and let Ryan talk for a minute.
Don't go on to the next slide yet, because I do want to address one of the remix issues. Go ahead and go back to that one.
Sure.
Because,
where am I? There I am.
All right. Wow, too many prompts. I don't know what to say now. No, so I was doing a bunch of work in Africa. We worked on a big project all over Africa for telecommunication regulation. Right. So we developed a master's degree at a core set of institutions that shared resources across 21 universities in 11 countries. Right. So this is where I got introduced to the concept of OERs, because we had to be able to create content at each institution and then share the same content with all these other 20 institutions. The same core topics had to be taught, but the local teacher had to flavor it to make it relevant for their country. So we had content developed in South Africa, in several spots in South Africa, and we had content developed in Nigeria, and content developed in Zimbabwe, and Zambia, and Tanzania, and Rwanda. And this is not a joke. These are all the places that we worked with, right? And each of these universities within these countries would develop their own specialties, right? So and then they would put that content onto a CD, and then they would mail it, and then it would get modified, translated, because we worked in Francophone and English countries. So all of these topics got translated. And the only way we could do this was if we had the universities sign agreements to allow their faculty to create OERs for this specific purpose. So we could actually achieve the goal of raising up the level of understanding about telecommunication issues across the continent, right? Not just the country, but across the continent, with a core set of standards on what telecommunication policy and regulation is all about. So we used OERs to do that. And you just kind of we had the professors develop it, and then they turned it loose to other professors, and then those professors tweaked it as much as possible. But you still had your core experts in each topic would be located at each university, and then it was just kind of flavored out there. So it was really amazing. It was cool. And that's where I was really excited about OERs from that point on. I was like, let's do this with everything. So there's my example of what you're talking about. So teaching with these, I think this is mainly you, right? Isn't it? Is it me? Who's talking about this one? Who's it say?
I'll rest my voice, Ryan. I'll let you.
Oh, you're resting your voice. You're letting me talk. Okay. Well, as we just talked about, it was the support students quite heavily. And near and dear to my heart is also this dissemination of ABA, right? So when you create this content and you create it and you label it as an OER, right, then you can literally start to disseminate your science and your understanding about the world to others, right? So who's your target audience? Is it other students? Is it other faculty members? Is it parents? Is it people with autism? Is it people that want to just improve their life in some way, shape, or form by understanding behavior? Whatever it is, you can do it, and you can release this stuff. And then so as a result, you're disseminating, right? And then the recursive OERs is kind of a fun idea, right? So if I use OERs, then, but you can remix and you can redistribute. Why not have your students do OER type assignments, or have the option of adding an OER layer to it, right? So you can, I want you to create this resource and you can choose to make an OER. because you're starting with an OER. You can't really, Rachel and I had this discussion the other day, and she was very clear about why it's not okay to force someone to do an OER, because that's their own private work, right? They're doing that work. They should have the choice if they want to make it into an OER. And there's some other reasons too that it was brilliant. I was like, oh, that's really good thinking. Like I didn't even challenge it. But the idea is that you could have your students do that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then it also talks about, we can also get into the research on peer education, right? So there's quite a bit of research that supports that education from your peers improves educational outcomes on from the learner, right? So it's the classic social psychology with regards to peer modeling, and of course we could get into the behavioral stuff with modeling and all that fun stuff too. So, but we're not going to today, because it's beyond the point. Anyway, you can have students create this content and then reshare the content, and guess what? Now they're teaching the content. Well, if you ever want to really learn something, teach it, right? So have the students create the content, modify it for their own flavors and their own memes for today, and whatever jokes and stuff that's relevant for now, and have them redo it. So it works really well. It's really kind of a cool approach.
I think selfishly, as the instructor, I love the fact that there's no excuses, right? My students have the materials they need from the day they start class. There's none of this, well, I need to order my textbook, so I'm going to be a week behind. Nope, day one, you're ready to go. You have everything that you need. It's in the learning management system, or you have access to it, or you have the link to it. If it's a provided resource as opposed to a created resource, and more on created resources coming up.
Oh gosh. The big bright red arrow, because I'm not even going to talk about it, because it just always feels weird to mention this other project that my colleague Brad Bishop and I do in these sorts of presentations, because it feels very self-serving. But
to be fair though, I typed shameless plug, you didn't.
I know
the arrow there, you did.
But it is a shameless plug, like it is. But the point is that Sitecore is an OER. Now, ironically, you can't really tag that on YouTube. So if you really want to use our stuff, technically you should email us. But you'll also notice on our core channel, at the base of our channel, if you go to the home channel, it says all of resources are open educational access, and we just require a CC BY. So it's just CC BY. Take them, chop them up, tell them that Brad and I did the work, and then have fun. Feel free to flip the words around, whatever you want. But there's only a couple people doing that. That would be us, and then also the Behave podcast, of course, Mr. Brian Middleton, who's absolutely awesome. And he's also a member of the OER SIG. Surprise, surprise, the people that are creating these things are the members out there. So that's about it. There's a couple others, and Dr. Howard kindly published a wonderful article about it in Open Educational Resources and Behavior Analysis. And the first link is to her actual article, and the second link is to my favorite table in the article. We don't need to open it up, but it's there for those of you that are going to get this video later. Or you could always just look up Dr. Howard and Open Educational Resources, and it'll pop up. It's like the only thing I've heard on the topic. It's awesome. So, but there's a couple of textbooks out there. Basically, one of them's a supplemental textbook. That's just the first one. And the second one is about instruction and functional assessment.
I do want to mention something else, which I think is in progress. Veronica and I were talking right before we got started today, and I think Dr. Pavone may here in the room, is I think there is
needs to speak up.
Existing SABA grant in the world.
There is.
That is still in progress. And so I think there may be some more resources that are in the process of being created. And so there may be an opportunity for folks to be involved in that as that comes to fruition. So hopefully our SIG may be able to share more information as that becomes available. So as we have more information to share about that, we'd love to do that. And we have some information later about how to join the SIG if you're interested. And as we learn more, we're certainly happy to share that as Dr. Pavone and Howard have that available for us to share. So more good news and more information coming about that.
Can we get Dr. Pavone, would you care to just announce that to the group? Just like not necessarily in text, but can you speak and say,
put you on the spot.
What we're doing? Yeah, we're gonna put you on here. There she is.
I can, but there might be a baby involved. But yeah.
If you're in behavior analysis and you can't handle babies, we got an issue.
Hey, I don't do that early intervention stuff. Remember behavior analysis, all humans, all that stuff? Yeah.
Sorry.
So our DBA SIG sponsored a special topics in behavior analysis book, and it is done and should be available as an open educational resource on July 1st. So I will be happy to share that link with the SIG if that's a possibility when it's there.
We would love that.
Yes,
and we will
please.
help distribute that for sure.
My students worked very hard on the chapters and I think they did a really great job. So I'm hoping it's going to be a helpful resource for those of us that are teaching and want to have some interesting corners of the world discussed in the ABA context. All right, I'm turning my video off.
Thank
Bye.
you. And thanks for letting us put you on the spot there. We appreciate that.
Okay.
So, in terms of challenges, and, Ryan and I, both can, speak to what some of the challenges are, but, certainly the biggest one, and, what Maggie just said, hopefully is one of the things that can help address this is there just isn't enough. So really what this does is the OER that are out there and that are hopefully increasing to be out there become supplemental resources rather than sole resources as we are teaching and preparing this next generation of behavior analysts. So the work of the OER, using OER to teach ABA so often becomes projects in open pedagogy, which we'll talk here a little bit about, but simply not having quite enough of them seems to be one of the key challenges. And Ryan, would you speak to some of these other challenges that we have?
Sure, finding them. It's not easy to find them. There's some resources out there that you can go to. Again, I always refer back to Dr. Howard's article because it's got a big long list of stuff. But so there's things you can do to get some of these resources and tools available by doing Google searches and going to specific websites. But it's not easy, and you're going to spend a lot of time trying to find it, and then you might have to spend some time tweaking it, because if it's a true OER, you'll be able to build off of it and then make it more relevant for you. I've released some years and years ago that were eventually published in books because somebody had grabbed them, which is fine. That was the whole point. But they had modified, they used the core image and something I'd done in Illustrator, and then they just changed all the language around it because they didn't like the words that I used, and that's fine. So they did it their own way. So that was cool, but they're hard to find, right? So in ensuring their validity and vetting them, who wants to vet all of the videos from Sitecore? I don't. Like, we did that once. We don't want to do it again. We let our users vet them, and if they don't like them, they tell us and they vote them down, or they tell us that we got it completely wrong and we remove them and re-record them. But think about how much effort that would be for every person to find out, is this resource actually accurate? Is it real? And what happens if somebody takes a resource and tweaks it and edits it and then makes it not accurate? Because it's an open educational resource, they can turn everything around. They can say reinforcement is just reward. And they say, see, I got that from Ryan. And then they tweaked it, and not me, right? So there's the problem with the vetting, right? And then ensuring access. How do you ensure that your resource gets seen and gets used? And how do you maintain that? How do you continue to provide those accesses? And how do others roll it out as well? So it's, where do you put it? An open Google Drive, which if you're paying attention to your Google Drive, all your links the other day, some of your links just died. All of them are dead. So now you have to change all your stuff in order to reshare all your things again, depending on which versions you're working with. So it's a mess, and it's something that you have to manage, and time is money, right? So who's going to pay you to do all this work? Interesting problem. Sorry, I was reading the chat window. Don't just teach with OERs, create them. So the tagline behind this whole presentation, the second part, was teaching ABA with OERs. It was, you can't. You can only teach some of ABA with OERs. So we need to create them, right? So that's really kind of the absolutely big message here. So we need to create them. Creating OERs. Yes, you can do it. So create a slide deck, create a video, narrate a slideshow, record a lecture, write a book, create a workbook, record a podcast, conduct interviews, assign OER creation to students. The super hard part, though, isn't all of that stuff. It's literally just taking copy and paste and putting that little picture on it. or writing CC BY at the bottom, or saying open educational resource, or whatever way you want to identify that your item is actually open. This is probably the most standard way, is using that image. You can get those from the Creative Commons. If there's other layers of those images, we're not going to get into that today. And you can go to the Creative Commons and figure that out. So if you put that on your document, then that pretty much secures it as being an OER. However, thank you, Veronica, or Dr. Howard, for that. However, some of that's a little tricky to do in certain occasions, so sometimes I just write it out. I said, license CC BY, or just CC colon BY. I just put that at the bottom of some documents. But you could have any of these things happen. So sometimes you need permission if you're the faculty and you're working with the university and you want to create an OER on company time, so to speak. Double check your intellectual property rules within your contracts and make sure that you have the authority to do that. And then also approach universities if they want to, like, do you want to do this? Is this, if they don't allow it, you can start to make that happen. You can advocate for it. And then again, you can work with your students and all these things. There's tons of things that you can do, anything. So I even left off draw pretty pictures for narration and videos and books and whatever the case it may be. Book release talk.
I know one thing that I've started to do, Ryan, is, if
Yeah.
I'm presenting, even if it has nothing to do with ABA, right? So, I started in the world of teacher education, and sometimes, believe it or not, I do presentations that have nothing to do with ABA at all, or nothing to do with OER at all. And so what I have started to do, since especially being involved with the OER SIG, is I have started to use this CC BY license on other presentations that I do.
Yep.
For two reasons. One, I've gotten in the habit of it, and I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to share my materials. I'm happy to let other people engage in those 5 R's with materials that I prepare and that I create, whether it has to do with ABA or whether I'm preparing a presentation for pre-service teachers on something that has absolutely nothing to do with this topic. But the other reason I do it is it gives me a great excuse to educate others on what that thing is and what that thing means and why I did it and why I put it there. And so it always means that I have an opportunity to add a slide or add conversation or spend a few minutes talking about what OER are and why I added that license and what it means that they, as the audience member, the person who attended, can do with these materials that I provided. And so if I'm presenting at some other conference or to a group of educators or police officers or whatever the audience is, or whatever materials I have created to present, even outside my world as a faculty member with students, I have gotten in the habit of doing this. And, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, I might have felt more guarded. And I think I might have been like, but it's my stuff, but I prepared it, but it's my thing, but I put the work into it. And then, I've kind of let that go, right? Because it's a CC BY license. I'm still getting credit for it. And I think part of the work of being an educator by vocation is dissemination, whether it's ABA, whether it's education, whether it's parenting, whatever it is that I'm speaking about. My vocation is to share good information that is research-based, that is from my experience. And so this has become my habit. So I now do this with everything that I do. So those of you who are presenting at other events, I would encourage you to try this and see how it feels. Decide that you like it, please. And then do this, make this part of your routine, and make part of that routine as you open or as you close to explain why you did that and what this thing means. Because I think there's a lot of people who just simply don't know what OER are or what this license symbol means or what CC BY means. And so now you've given yourself an opportunity not only to share your dissemination with credit, but you've also educated people about something else beyond just the content that you went to disseminate. And so the more we can share that, the more we are perpetuating dissemination of quality information, not just the information itself, but the act of dissemination itself. So I would encourage you to do that in whatever circle, whatever context, whatever content information you are sharing, and be willing to, it's harder, I think, for people who are a little earlier in their careers, but be willing to let that go a little bit. And admittedly, I think that would have been very hard for me a decade ago. I think it would have had some difficulty, but I don't care now. I would happily share my work and have others share it as well.
I was the same way until I worked on with an organization where that's what we had to do. That was the only option that we could that employ. And then we were working in that context in Africa. We were working in an open source software as well. So it was our whole system was integrated around the concept of openness. And Stephen over here asked a great question. And part of that protection, Stephen, of preventing that telephone game is leaving things open. If it's closed, right, no one has access to the original, then you get the change and the change and the change and the change. Well, you can never go back to the original because that was stolen. Somebody stole that out of a textbook and they copied it, right? So you can't go back and see what the original said. Somebody's got this out there. Well, if you have a genuine OER, you can trace it back to its roots because you have CC BY. You can always go back to where I got this information from. It's kind of like a reference. In fact, it is a reference. Like, here's where I got this. Now, think about how many secondary references when you're out there in a journal article. It says, I didn't really read this. I'm referencing it as the author read it, right? So that's that secondary reference thing in the APA style. We recommend against that when we're in our scientific writing. You shouldn't be doing that. Read your original sources, right? And this is the whole point, is to prevent that problem. So Dr. and Professor Derek Keats, who got me going in the open world out of these several places, but the University of Western Cape at the time, he was huge on this stuff. And he's like, the best way to protect your content is to release it for free. And I couldn't understand it. And it took forever. And it took a lot of drinking in a lot of countries in order for him to explain it to me in a way that I understood. And then once I understood it, I was like, oh yeah, I get it, right? So then it's always open, 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 open. And I try to do everything as open as possible. Sometimes there's some constraints where you can't, but I would have had the same reaction before sitting on with Derek and wherever we were sitting when he finally convinced me to adopt the idea.
The last item on that list was assigning OER creation to students.
Yep.
So I'm going to give you just one example. There are certainly a few that different members of the SIG are doing, but one particular example that I have started doing with some of the students at Mary Baldwin University.
This is cool.
And there is a QR code if you want to read a little bit more about it or how you might implement something like this. And part of the reason I did this is I have students who are interested in a lot of areas outside of autism and disability, particularly sports. We've had a number of athletic coaches. And so they're constantly looking for, we've got all these terms and terms that are in the task list, right? And they're looking for, okay, well, what about in sports? Or, well, what about with animals? Or, I want silly examples in pop culture. Okay, fine. So let's take all these terms that you have to know for our discipline, and let's take some of these different domains and let's come up with examples for each of them. And so what we're doing is working on creating an OER database, essentially, where we can cross-reference. So students can create examples for each of these terms across these different domains. So eventually this will become an OER searchable glossary where somebody who maybe they're interested in a particular term like manned, so they can look up the term manned and then they can look up all these different examples of manned across these different types of domain. Or alternately, maybe I have another collegiate athletic coach in the program who's like, I am only interested in sports, nutrition, fitness examples. I really don't care about autism examples. I don't want to read autism examples. I just want to look at sports, nutrition, fitness examples. Let me look at all these terms. I want a glossary of all these ABA terms, but I only want to look at sports, nutrition, fitness examples. So you see how this is going to be sort of a searchable database where they can look by term or they can look by domain. And so I have an example here with Punisher in pop culture. So students are having a lot of fun kind of creating examples. We're being careful, and you can see if you look later with the QR link what we're doing to be mindful of student permissions, vetting. Brian talked earlier about vetting, making sure the quality of student work as it's included in the OER, asking students, if you want to be included in this project, are you giving us permission to make sure that this is accurate, that we're working with you to refine, to make that make sure these definitions are, or these examples are correct and accurate. And what I love about it is we're starting to get some examples that are really creative and really fun. Right now, this is incentivized participation. So yes, you can read that as extra credit. I'm okay with that. I know not all faculty are. I'm good with that. So some of my students participate, some don't. I'm hoping to sort of revamp this a little bit, encourage more participation this fall. COVID saw a little bit of a decrease in participation as students were focused on certainly more important matters, as quite frankly, I was too. So there you go.
Unmute. There we go. All right, social media. Right. So one of the fun things you can do is social media. So I think there was, did I take it off of this slide? Oh no. Okay. So time for my middle-aged brain. I am not TikToking. We've had several requests for Sitecore to TikTok. Not going to happen. First off, I'm not going to turn my camera like this. It's wrong. You don't leave your okay. Videos like this, not like this. TikTok like this, not good. No, I'm kidding. But we're definitely not going to do TikTok, like not our thing. So we're going to let somebody else do that. In fact, I'm just going to assign it to my students and say, okay, guess what? Here you go. You need to TikTok. You can make it a private account or you can make it a public account. You can do what you want to protect it, but you need to share it with me. And we can figure out how to do that. So then they can do these types of things. And if they choose to make them OERs, which hope they do. Then they'll be out there for the world, like that psychologist TikTok lady that's really awesome. It's got like 74 billion followers or something. Too bad behavior analysis can't get that popular. Hint, hint. Anyway, so the students shall out there be social mediating, and I am stuck in the old social medias of Facebook, where all the grandmas are, and Instagram, where all of the pretty fake people are. So with that is the case, if you want to click one more time, I will show you some examples of what you can do. So last year, we were part of the cool, awesome ABCs of ABA. Well, and these are a handful of the ones that came out from Sitecore, and we just stole them from our own channel. And you'll notice that little tag isn't on any of these, right? Because it killed the design. I'm not doing it. I spent too much time. Brad spent too much time designing these things. Not going to happen. I'm not going to put it on there. So what did I do? If you go to our Instagram page, it says every single post on here is a CC BY. And then you'll also find references where we buried them in there somewhere. The references of where we got the photos. All of the photos are either genuinely open or CC BYs. We try to go for the full open ones where you don't even have to tag people in them, because the point being that it ruins the design, so to speak. But we do have them out there, and we saved all the information where we got the photos from. So because they're all open as well. And then some of them are in Insta, some of them are not. You get the idea. So anyway, we did a whole bunch of those things, and we released them to the world and said, here's open access resources. So in the future, I will probably have my students do similar type things in similar type contexts, because if you tag things properly, they just become a resource for everybody else to use when they're studying for their BCBA exam. So why not? And then that's that equity and all that fun stuff that you can start to infest the field with people doing their own flavor of it, so to speak, and then thereby reaching more people. So endless possibilities. You can Facebook away. You can do.
I still haven't learned how to do Instagram stuff. So, Ryan, you'll have to teach me how to Instagram.
Pause. Just go get Canva. Then done. That's it. That's all you gotta do.
Other duties as assigned.
Yeah. True.
So
scholarship.
Not quite OER, but just other equity-minded things that those of you who are faculty or working with students can keep in mind. I mentioned textbooks, for on-campus students. We keep our textbooks on reserve, so students who can get to campus can have access to them if they're unable to purchase them. Yep, not an OER thing, but certainly an equity access thing that we try to do. Some universities are able to purchase textbooks directly through publishers, so you can embed them in your learning management system. So that's what LMS stands for. Those are things like Canvas, Blackboard, whatever your university is using them. Sometimes they can be built into financial aid, which again, sounds good, but you're building into financial aid. That still becomes a loan later, but it can offset it upfront for students. Articles. So if you are using articles from Java or any of our other flagship journals, make them available to your students, make it easy for them to get so they're not having to spend time to get them. The caveat there is they should know how to get them through your library. They have access to them as students at no additional cost to them. But once they know how to do that, consider saving them the time to do that. But if you are faculty, you know, your time is also your money. So you might be able to utilize, I know our library staff is happy to pull them for faculty. I know how to pull them, so I don't need to learn that skill. So I know that skill, my faculty, and I'm sorry, my colleagues, librarians, library staff will pull them for me. Once I know my students will know how to do that skill, I will make it available for them. They know they don't need to replicate that exercise 800 times. Free open access resources, great, get them when I can. Use books across courses. We try to do that to the degree that we can, but I tell students that up front, because otherwise what they might do is they will rent a book instead of purchase a book. And if they rent a book for a course and then they find out 2 courses later they need that book again, it would have cost them less to have purchased it in the first place than to have to rent it twice. So I always tell them up front, you are going to need this book for more than 1 course in this program, because it will impact their decision to purchase or rent. Again, just minimize total cost to the degree that we can. So think about other ideas that work for you, your situation, your employer, your university, your clinic, your supervision situation that you're able to do when you're thinking about access in general. But these ideas are not OER specific, but access for students to increase their outcomes and student success is important to us as well. So keeping those in mind. This is us. This QR code will send you, hopefully it should, to our website. There is no cost to be a member of our SIG. There are not a lot of SIGs that are free, if any others, I'm not sure, to join. But registering to be a member is required. You actually have to register. There are directions if you click on that QR code that will take you there. A little bit about our mission statement here as well. We do have a Facebook page. We're trying to be a little bit more active with that, but joining will get you on email lists so that you can get information as it becomes available, learn about things like this presentation that we did today. When we do offer CE events, we do them at no cost because that aligns to our mission. So that is a little bit about us. As Dr. Pavone mentioned, when she has information about that additional OER resource coming available, we will be sending that out, hoping to share that with our membership as well. So that's another great reason to join. If you are not a member, is you will find out about that information once that becomes available to us to share. List of resources for you. This list of resources was pulled from another presentation that I did with Dr. Howard. So I've cited that on the bottom here. But one of these articles in particular, I want to call your attention to is the Nava and Fahmy et al. Article, which is an excellent one to read because it talks about student preference for using OER in the classroom. And I absolutely love that. It's about student generated content. So if I had to point you in the direction of one of these, that Nava article would be a personal favorite to send you in the direction of. So questions and conversations, we will spend some time, happy to do that. This is your QR code as well as a link. And Veronica, if you would also put the link in the chat for me, I would be most appreciative. Good. This will take you to the survey, and if you would also put your first and last name again in the chat box for CE attendance purposes, that would be fantastic. We will hang out for questions. I think there are few enough attendees that you can speak questions, you can type questions. We will get your questions answered. I will come back to this slide in a minute so that you can get back to this QR code, but I do want to put in a shameless plug for Mary Baldwin University because we're sponsoring the CE credit for this event. We are an ACE provider. We're also a CEU provider for the IBAO, the International Behavior Analysis Organization. I'm sure many of you are aware that the BACB is soon going to stop credentialing folks who are seeking behavior analytic credentials outside of certain countries. And this is an alternate credentialing provider, and we are a CEU provider for them as well. So if you don't get your certificate within 2 weeks, let me know. That will not happen because I am on top of things. I am a type A personality, and I guarantee you it will not go that long. And if something happens, there is an error. So reach out to me. Easy to remember my email address. It's rpotter. Just remember Harry Potter, except my first name is Rachel, rpotter@marybaldwin.edu, and I will follow up. But let me go back a slide so you have that QR code. And we are open for questions, conversation, thoughts, anything you would like to share or comment on, we are available to you.